There's a God, but I'm the son he's embarrassed of. You're the screw up son. When you die and you come out of your body, people will ask these near-death experiencers, were you like a ghost? And no, there's a lot of common elements. And of course, some people have a life review. Those are pretty common. Some meet dead relatives. Some people meet their pets. Are we alone in the universe? No. The universe is full of life, and there are other universes, in other dimensions that are also full of life. There's alien civilizations that had technology for a couple of million years, very advanced. And of course, they've gone through their barbaric age and all that, and they're fighting like we're just coming out of now. I'm going to start seeing some ships landing and stuff in about 4 years. And it's going to be spotty here and there. They don't want to cause a panic. They've been through this before. They had replicators and transporters, and there's a Galactic Federation of Worlds, and they have a prime directive.
Today we are here with David Suich. David is a retired engineer and now a near-death experience researcher, author, and spiritual counselor, and is currently serving on the board of directors of the Near-Death Institute. His spiritual journey began in 2007 during a traumatic time in his life when he clicked on a YouTube video about an atheist who died momentarily and visited heaven. This led him on a 16-year journey of research into near-death experiences, including the testimonies of over 1,200 people who have crossed over to the other side and returned. And we are very excited to talk with him today about his research. So David, we want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here on your show.
I want to start with asking you, what drew you to becoming an NDE researcher and counselor?
Well, back when I was a Christian, I remember in Proverbs 20:30, it says, sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways. And certainly that was the case with me. So I was a Christian. I was working in a job as an engineer in a Fortune 500 company, making really good money. And in 1999, at age 34, I came down with tendonitis, chronic tendonitis. Started my hands, went to my feet, my jaw, and it worsened over a 20-year period. But by 2007, 8 years into it, I had been prayed for by, a dozen churches at least, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, I don't know. I had spent at least $30,000, $40,000 in various doctors and treatments, and nothing could cure me. I was confined to a mobility scooter. I couldn't be on my feet more than 10 minutes. So I even had to use a mobility scooter to go to the grocery store. Fairly young guy. I was in my 30s when this all started. And I got very depressed and thought, I came to this conclusion. I thought, well, one of two things is happening because, the Bible says, ask and it is given, and you'll receive. I thought, well, either it's all a lie and there's no God. I didn't think that was the case. And I thought more likely, there's a God, but I'm the son he's embarrassed of. You're the screw up son. You're not a good Christian. I want nothing to do with you. And that was what I thought. And just like talking about that, remembering that feeling now is getting me choked up. And that was a very painful conclusion to come to. And it was around that time I clicked on a random video in my YouTube feed. This is 2007. So YouTube was a couple of years old at that time. There was hardly any near-death experience videos on YouTube. And it was about an atheist, the one, you mentioned in the bio there in the intro, who died and saw the afterlife. And that's what got me started. And of course, after hearing a few hundred, I thought, well, somebody needs to write a book about the general ideas these people say, because there were lots of good books out there that were very high spiritual, esoteric books. You had to kind of, be high end with your spirituality to understand them. There were lots of individual testimonies, but I didn't see a really good 101 spirituality. Raymond Moody's book was pretty good, but back then you didn't have the communication, and he missed a couple of big points that I thought were important. I thought, well, let's do a book. And that's when it really got rolling. Because when I tell people I'm writing a book about this, they'd say, oh, Juan over there down the street said his dad had one of these, and I'd go talk to him. And now I get to talk to him all the time with my spiritual counseling. So it's been a wonderful journey. I'm grateful to everybody who shared their testimonies, because it really changed my life for the positive in every aspect of my life. Relationship with my family, fear of death, that's gone. I have joy and peace most of the time. And before it was mostly anger and depression. So I'm really grateful for all those who share their stories. You saved my life, and I know you've helped a lot of other people as well.
David, what are some of the common themes that you're finding in your research with NDEs?
Oh, well, there's quite a few common things. Probably the biggest one is the good feelings up there. So when you die and you come out of your body, you know, people will ask these near-death experiencers, were you like a ghost? And no, he said, I'm the opposite of a ghost. I felt more real, more alive than I've ever felt in my life. So there's a heightening of the clarity of thought. There's a heightening and intensity of emotions that we don't have down here. So probably the love is the most common element, you know, that I've heard from just about every NDE, the love of heaven. And they say even the word of love is completely inadequate to describe it. You know, they talk about it like it's the best experience they've ever had in their lives. You know, it's the everything of life is to experience this love. And there's nothing like it on earth. You know, and they say things like, imagine the strongest love you ever felt in your life, multiply it by 1,000. That's what it feels like. Stuff like that. You know, one person said, if you had a genie with a lamp, you know, a magic lamp with a genie, and instead of 3 wishes, you got unlimited wishes here on earth. You could wish for anything a human being could have, you know, on earth. You wouldn't be nearly as happy as you are there in heaven. So that's a big element. No time. So whether the experience is negative or positive, about 3 to 5% were negative experiences. There's no time on the other side of the veil. There's a feeling of familiarity. You know, this is where I came from. I'm back home. Oh, that adventure on earth was only a temporary adventure. You know, oh, I remember. And then of course there's things that other commonalities like, you know, when people ask about religion, it's pretty clear heaven is not invested in the dynamics of religious structure as we are. You know, the benevolent source of all that is, the creator of the universe that expresses itself in everything we have, does not have anger or judgment or hatred or even expectation. It just loves unconditionally. That's the most common element. And there's things like the senses. People can have these mind-to-mind communications where there's no chance of a misunderstanding. You have 360-degree vision, you know, no blind spot back here. Your seeing is perfect. There's a lot of common elements. And of course, some people have a life review. Those are pretty common. Some meet dead relatives. Some people meet their pets in heaven. I've lost count of how many testimonies I've heard where people say, I met my formal pet in heaven. You know, there was my dog Sparky from when I was 9 years old, and they could communicate with them. And so, yeah, those are the common elements.
What would be one of the most surprising thing that you've come across in your research?
Oh, probably the first big jaw dropper was in Howard Storm's book. I bought his book after I clicked on that first YouTube video. And, you know, some people ask several thousand questions there in heaven before they get sent back because there's no time. So you can be dead 15 seconds and you have an experience that's longer than your life here on earth, if you could put it in temporal terms. So one of the shockers is people will ask, are we alone in the universe? You know, no, the universe is full of life. And there are other universes, you know, in other dimensions that are also full of life. That was pretty shocking. The other thing that was very shocking was why we're doing this, you know, because one of the questions I had early on, you know, hearing about this beautiful place of heaven where you feel love and peace and a sense of purposefulness and protection and unity and all this wonderful feelings, you know, it's like, it's the best thing ever. It's like, well, what are we doing down here if it's so perfect there?
Right.
And so one of the shockers was apparently consciousness learns through contrast. And in order for the love of heaven to exist, in order for it to continue to grow, in order for the fractal of God to grow, there has to be a small portion of creation experiencing the opposite, experiencing contrast. And then all of creation learns from that. So by what we are doing down here, even though these physical lives are extremely difficult, we are a critical part of the engine of growth of God, of creation. And, you know, from an earthly perspective, we kind of feel like screw ups a lot of times, you know, I mean, now people are very self-critical and, you know, I don't have my life together and I made so many mistakes and that kind of thing, or I've been bad. And from heaven's perspective, it's like, no, it doesn't matter whether you choose the love or the fear side of this love-fear duality we're in the physical world. You learn from both, and it helps all of creation. And so we are honored in heaven that from the perspective of those in heaven, they consider us the courageous ones, They consider us, we're like the brave daredevil souls. You're going to leave this place of perfection and you're going to go down and become a human being. You're not even going to remember your family, remember your home, complete amnesia, and you're going to suffer. You're going to be in these frail bodies and feel, emotional and physical pain, and you're going to go through trauma. And sometimes some people are going to want to quit, and you're going to do that. And the answer to the human being is, well, yes, because I love my family and I want to help creation, and it's hard to swallow, but I've heard it so many times. I really do believe it, that we're doing an important job down here.
And just a quick note on that, I've also heard that there are souls basically lined up to come to Earth, that they, it's almost like winning the lottery to be able to be picked to come here.
Oh, yes. So first of all, if you're going to come to Earth, you can't be a newbie soul. You don't climb Mount Everest when you've just learned how to walk as a 2-year-old toddler. You're just not capable of facing the challenge. You're not even capable of facing the challenge unless you're, even an expert hiker. You've got to be a world-class athlete to climb Mount Everest. It's the same with Earth. You have to be a world-class soul to qualify for Earth. And it is such a huge jump in consciousness, so much learning. I mean, it's like a fast school. It's tough. Whenever you do something fast, it's tough, right? If I want to walk a mile, I can go a nice leisurely pace and get there in 25 minutes. But if I want to get there fast, I got to sprint. And so, being such a tough place and only the best souls are qualified, even so many want to come here. For every 100 souls that want to come here, there's only one body. So it's a privilege to be here, as tough as it can be. And as much as, people like me whine and complain, can't this be over already? No, your job's not done. It is a privilege to be here, a great privilege.
So speaking of best souls, Jesus, what role does he play on our planet?
Well, I kind of view Jesus as the core of God, who works directly with human beings as an advocate and a helper on our behalf. So he is kind of the connection between the all-powerful, creative, benevolent source of all life that we call God and, us human beings and our physical incarnations. So they needed somebody to fill a role. They needed part of creation, part of God, to fill this role, to make the connection. And that's who Jesus is. And he's not quite like the Jesus I learned about when I was a Christian. I believe he is who he said he was. He was a son of God. Did he come down here to make a sacrifice? Oh, yes. Did he have to die to erase our sins? Well, I'm not sure about that. But I do know that there's no condemnation from heaven. And he's supposed to be a very funny guy, too. One of the things I hear is like, he's really funny. I mean, he's just like talking to your best friend. Funny. You can say anything to him. He's completely wise. He always knows just what to say to calm you down or encourage you. He's just an amazing portion of God. And Jesus has been to every planet in all times with intelligent life, and some rejected him like we do, and some accept him. That's my understanding of Jesus.
You did mention earlier that some people do have negative experiences when they cross over. It seems like it's a smaller percentage of people who have near-death experiences that have a negative one. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What causes that? Why would somebody have a negative experience, since it seems like it's such an amazing place to be and we get so much great information back from most people, but the few that cross over and don't have a great experience, what would be the cause for something like that?
That's one of the questions I have. I don't really completely understand why some people have negative experiences. I do know that some people will generate fear in their near-death experiences. So they find themselves in the dark void and they don't know where they are. They start to panic. And in the afterlife, it manifests just like it does here, but it's just multiplied by 100, So whatever you're focusing on, that's just going to balloon and snowball and go out of control. And so they start going into horrible fear mode. And then as soon as they calm down and say, well, I'm dead, there's nothing I can do about it, then the experience becomes positive. And then sometimes they turn around, see the light and all that. But people who have negative experiences tend to be people who spent lifetimes living entirely selfish, cruel, narcissistic, manipulative lives, creating chaos and misery in other people. Now, a lot of people like that don't have negative experiences. So I think that the emotional state a person dies in can have something to do with it. For instance, suicides, a lot of those tend to be negative experiences. Now, that's not to say I'm judging people or shaming them for having suicidal thoughts. I've been there myself. I know what that feels like. But suicide is never used as a learning tool. So every negative experience we have down here on Earth, being abused or, having horrible trauma, we can put ourselves through a lot of things. Every experience you can imagine can be a learning experience except suicide. And it always sets us back. And so I think these negative experiences, when there's a suicide, is because they're in a negative state. They're not being punished for killing themselves or anything like that. It's just a personal setback. And it's a choice, whether conscious or unconscious. It's not a punishment. It's not permanent. When a soul is ready, they'll all come home. And I haven't heard this from near-death experiencers, but I strongly suspect that every soul at some point in their development, and most of the people who would listen to a channel like this, who would be attracted to a talk like this, have probably already done it, will choose to experience complete or partial separation from God. And when you separate yourself completely or partially from love, all that's left is fear, and the experience is hellish. But there's something very interesting. Every person I have heard who is having a negative experience, in every single case, when they call out to heaven for help, they're always rescued. And I just talked with another near-death experiencer about a month ago who said the same thing. In his research, he said he never heard a single testimony of somebody who was having a negative experience and called out for help to heaven and nothing happened. So if you find yourself in the afterlife in a negative experience, call out for help. You'll be rescued immediately. Yeah, and it's not permanent. It's a soul, when they come around, they'll always come home. But I think it's for the purposes of learning, right? So when you go without eating for 3 days, how much better does the food taste? You're a lot more grateful for that food. It tastes a lot better. So when we experience the opposite, it strengthens that which we want. And so I think it is part of the perfect plan of creation. If it didn't have a place in the perfect plan of creation, negative experiences wouldn't exist. But when you listen to NDEs who have had negative experiences, even their lives are changed for the positive. They come back more altruistic, more loving, more interested in meaningful relationships with family and friends. They tend to leave bad habits behind and become much more loving, spiritual people. So there's a purpose for it. I don't understand it completely.
There's, just to jump in, what you just said touched my heart like an arrow. There's somebody out there who needed to hear, whether it's an NDE experience or if they're just going through it, because we are on the topic of NDEs and also suicide. Somebody needed to hear that if you reach out for love, it's there. And that it just got me. Like not that I needed to hear that, but it just was such a beautiful message. And I'm so thankful you just said that, because somebody probably needed to hear it today.
When I was in the worst part of my life and I saw no hope, and it was nothing but pain and suffering and loneliness. And I knew there was no way out. I knew this wasn't going to change. It was only going to get worse. I wanted my life to end. And the only reason I didn't end it, because I knew it would devastate my family and friends. I knew heaven doesn't want us to do that. And I was afraid of doing it. Those are the three things that stopped me. And had I seen what was coming, had I seen my life today, that thought wouldn't have been there. And so, I know it's tough down here. I know a lot of people are suffering emotionally. I know sometimes you just feel like giving up, that there's not a person in the world that cares, but you're never alone. And there are people that care. As a matter of fact, every person on earth loves you. They've just forgotten that they do. And on the other side of the veil, we're one big family. And so don't give up, because you never know what good things are coming. Yeah, hang in there. I know it's tough down here, but for anybody who's going through this, please hang in there. We're with you. There's 3 people right here who care and want you to stay.
I think that's such a great message, David, because I always think you're right. You don't know what's coming up next. And there could be something amazing right around the corner. You just don't know it. And oftentimes, if you look back on your history of the life that you currently have, you might have had moments in time that you didn't understand how you got from there to here. And that happened, right? You were able to get through those moments. So who's to say that you can't get through the next difficult moment? You just have to stay with it and just keep putting one foot in front of another. So I think that's a great message. So thank you for sharing that. So I did have a follow-up question on the near-death experience. Is that a moment in time that is pre-planned with the people who have these experiences, or is it an accident that takes place? I mean, I know obviously it's an accident when somebody passes over, but is it something that was already pre-planned in their life plan so that it could wake them up to real spirituality?
Well, it's both. So some people get to heaven and it's kind of like the reaction is, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. It's not your time yet. And they get sent back. And others are told you finished your work. So some people, they're done. But when you do your pre-soul planning, you have an exit strategy, and you often have several exit strategies. Okay, I finished my work. I can go home here, but maybe I'll have an NDE and decide if I want to continue or not. And others, just as you mentioned, it's to get them back on track. If I'm not doing well, make me have this NDE, get me back on track with my life. And it doesn't have to be an NDE. They'll send in people. So I was told by my spiritual guides, for example, that if I wasn't doing the job I was supposed to be doing, which is a spiritual teacher and counselor and helper, that my wife would get sent in to get me back on track. And that's exactly what happens. So yeah, there's lots of planning they do. And yeah, so sometimes it's an accident and they're not supposed to be there. And other times it was planned or it was an option.
Do you ever have people that share information about other universes, other dimensions, what life might be like on other planets? And are there extraterrestrials and aliens out there?
Yes, there are. So again, the universe is full of life. I haven't heard about these other dimensions, countless other dimensions with universes that are also full of life. But one guy was shown the relative size of our entire universe in the super universe of all that is. And he said it was a little pinpoint, so
wow.
Imagine how big creation is. So let's just talk about science for a second. Traveling the speed of light, that's 7 times around the earth in 1 second. If you were to travel at this tremendous speed of light and you want to cross the pinpoint of light in our universe that we call the Milky Way galaxy, which is a little pinpoint, go from one side to the other, you would have to travel all day, all night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an entire lifetime, and then repeat that for 1,200 lifetimes, just to pass the little pinpoint of light we call the Milky Way galaxy. So the universe is an unimaginably huge place. So of course, God is not that wasteful. It would be way overbuilt if we were alone. There's lots of us, and we're kind of like the new kids on the block. We think we've got the technology and, we're advanced and all that. Well, we've had high tech for 100 years or so. Not even that, I don't know. But there's alien civilizations that had technology for a couple of million years. Very advanced. And of course, they've gone through their barbaric age and all that, and they're fighting like we're just coming out of now. And so there are a countless number of aliens. Most of the life in this galaxy is humanoid, so very Star Trek-like. They have a body with 2 legs and 2 arms, and there are all sorts of variations. There are, beings that look kind of fish-like, aquatics. There are feline, cat-like. There are insectoids. There are reptilians. There are intelligent flying creatures. There's all sorts of variations, but a lot of them look like us. Like there are Pleiadians, for example, who are cosmic parents. They helped the seeding of life on this planet. And there are certain species of Pleiades, because it's a big group, that if you saw them, you wouldn't know the person wasn't human. They would look Nordic or German, blonde hair, fair skin. So yeah, there's a huge variation of life, and we're kind of the new guys on the block. We're just getting started.
You mentioned the seeding of the planet, and I was curious if you have heard more about that from your research. I know it's been said that the Anunnaki is who seeded us as a race. From what I understand, they changed the genetics of the Homo sapiens that were native species on Earth. Have you heard anything coming from the people that you've spoken to about that?
The information from near-death experiencers is spotty, but there are lots of channelers and lots of information. And so this is kind of speculation. But if you try and put it all together, basically the Anunnaki came along. They were looking for something called monatomic gold to fix their atmosphere because they had damaged their planet through manufacturing, environmental damage. And they had a hard time with their slave class, because their slave class had come from, a cooler planet. And so the Earth felt very hot to them, and there was a rebellion. And so they merged their DNA with ancient humanoid DNA, and they created us. And they kind of tweaked it to restrict us and disconnect us from connection to the divine. They wanted somebody smart enough to do the work, but not smart enough to be independent. And that's a violation of God's laws. And so they kind of got scolded and said, you got to take care of these human beings now and kind of watch over them. And you can't abuse them. You can't act like gods. And of course, that's exactly what they did. And sometime in the 60s, they were released from that. And now we're kind of on our own. But another race came in at that time, the Tarsha, I can't remember the name, Tarsha. And they said, well, these people screwed with your genetics, so we got to fix it. And they mixed their DNA with ours. And it kind of put us above the Anunnaki. So we became a threat. Yeah, that's how we started. Well, the Pleiadians, I don't know exactly what their role is, but I know that when you do get past the point of self-destruction, which we almost blew ourselves up, but we got past it. So Earth is not going to destroy itself. We're going to become an ascended species. Your job becomes to help seed life on another planet. So the Pleiadians have been kind of watching over us. They kind of have a hands-off, non-interference policy. You mentioned Star Trek. Well, that prime directive, Gene Roddenberry got that from a Pleiadian probably, because that's
Really?
their rule. And it's more of a guideline, right? So they'll interfere. So like if one group is going to start a war and send a missile up, they might disable the missile or something like that. You go online and find the stories of that happening, but that's them kind of interfering. So the general guideline is keep your hands off, but they want to do things like keep us from blowing ourselves up. And there was a lot of controversy in the galaxy apparently, because the dance of consciousness is one of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And it's just like rocking a car out of the mud. You rock the car back, and then the further you rock it back, the more you can push it forward. And that's how consciousness moves. Well, the further down you dip into darkness, the faster and higher you can spring back up into light. So the further you dip down in the fear, the more you can spring back into the love side of the equation of fear-love duality. So they thought we were being too risky, because if you dip too far down into fear, you destroy yourselves either through environmental disaster or war or stagnation or something. And a lot of those in the galaxy thought, those humans are going to kill themselves. What you're doing is too risky. And the Pleiadians said, no, we know what we're doing. And there was a big celebration when we passed the point of no return. All eyes of the galaxy right now are kind of upon us, because we're the only ones in the galaxy with this certain amount of free will, where we're choosing this love, fear, duality in a disconnected state. And that's where the big learning comes in. So by what we do down here, we help the galaxy learn, and the galaxy helps the universe, and the universe helps creation. So it's a tough job, but yeah, it was risky. We almost knocked ourselves off, but thanks to a lot of help from above, not just heaven, a lot of the positive alien friends who have been helping us along, we avoided self-destruction. So now we're going to be moving towards this new world of love that's coming.
From what I understand, most races have this trajectory to go through that we are currently on, as far as growing and learning and then becoming a space-faring civilization. And I know we're kind of at that precipice now, where that budding society that's getting ready to become a galactic citizen. And there's definitely some things we still have to work on in the meantime. But I definitely am fascinated by the whole topic. And you just brought up Gene Roddenberry. So I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit more about what you've learned as far as, how he came up with Star Trek? Because I've also heard the same thing, that he has actually been given information to be able to put that series together, which really speaks a lot of truth.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got a planet full of people who are jittery and shooty, you just don't show up at their front door. It's going to cause a panic. And back in the 1950s, before Star Trek, what was the general consensus with aliens? What were the movies about aliens? Were they coming down here and evil, sharing their technology and helping us and becoming best friends? Yeah, no, they're evil, right? So they're going to come down here to eat us or to steal our resources or for some nefarious reason. So the Pleiadians wanted to put a positive alternative in our minds that more reflects the reality of what we find ourselves in. And about 95% of the species out there are either neutral or positive. There's only a few misbehaving that are a threat. And so Gene Roddenberry was part of a group of channelers back in the 1950s. Some of them were Pleiadian channelers. And I read some of the notes that the minutes from that meeting, they scanned them and put them online. And so he got his ideas for for Star Trek from the Pleiadians. And it was rumored that he met a Pleiadian. And there was even an interview that I heard, a radio interview I heard, where he talked about this. He kind of touched on it, not much. But so it was done by the Pleiadians to kind of give a more positive view, to kind of prepare us for what's eventually going to happen, which is first contact. And if you believe what the channelers say, it looks like it's going to start happening pretty soon. We're going to start seeing some ships landing and stuff in about 4 years. And it's going to be spotty here and there. They don't want to cause a panic. They've been through this before, right? But they, when I first started learning about the Pleiadians, for instance, I heard things about, they had replicators and transporters, and there's a Galactic Federation of Worlds, and they have a prime directive where they don't get involved if you haven't made it. And I'm like, you guys aren't even making up a good lie. You're just copying Star Trek, you clowns. I mean, make up a good lie if you're going to make it. And then I found out this other stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, now, well, that makes sense now. So, I mean, it might be kind of a little funny when they show up and start talking about this something where you're like, there's a real Galactic Federation of Worlds?
See, Tracy, I told you. I told Tracy this years ago, and she was laughing. She nearly fell off her chair laughing at me.
I did.
Yeah, pretty. I mean, it seems crazy, but no crazier than what we've seen already, right? Over 500 years ago,
right.
A guy works out the math, very brilliant scientist, and he says, oh, well, what we all believe, the Earth being the center of the universe with the sun and stars going around us, that's not true. We're going through space at 90 miles a second around the sun. That was insane. That was just off your rocker crazy. And of course, Copernicus turned out to be correct, right? And in 1841, Richard Owen, examined large bone and teeth fragments, and he speculated there were once giant lizards roaming the earth that he called Dinosauria. Of course, dinosaurs turned out to be a real thing. Everybody thought it was a hoax he was doing for money. And then even as late as 1912, when Alfred Wegener first suggested the idea that the continents were slowly drifting across the surface of the earth, he was laughed at by everybody. Continents drifting? Come on, continental drift is real. So it seems crazy, but we've had a history of things that seem crazy that turned out to be true. So let's stay open-minded. That was a hard one for me to swallow as well, but I heard it from so many different channelers and stuff like that. I believe it now with the whole Star Trek. Yeah, but there's a Galactic Federation of Worlds, and we're going to be a member someday. They're kind of waiting for us to mature.
Yeah, I like to follow some of the channelers, and I think we both like Bashar, Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar. I think there's a lot of great information that he shares. And I'm just curious, you did mention a minute ago that we have disclosure coming, which that's a big topic we like to cover here as well. What do you think the next step in the process is? I do realize that we're starting to see more discussion openly about what's in the skies. And we've even had some recent newsworthy situations take place in Las Vegas. And I think Florida might have been another location. So are we going to start to see more of this taking place just so that people can become more aware of what's actually out there, what's coming, and not have such a shock to their system when they do find out the truth? And when do you think we could anticipate that happening?
Well, it's a slow process, and disclosure is going to happen on an individual basis. They're not going to show up on the White House lawn. There'd be a military response. They're smarter than that. And so they'll start, Pleiadians, for instance, will start turning off the shields. So they have camouflage. If you see a ship, this flying saucer, it's not Pleiadian unless they want you to see it. So they'll start turning off the camouflage. And then there'll be some landings. I don't know who's going to land first. It's going to be the Greys, the Andromedans, the Pleiadians. I don't know. But they're going to start landing probably within the next few years, maybe 5-10 years. And it's going to become more and more common. We're going to be slowly introduced to it because they don't want to cause a panic. If it was like that movie V that we saw, or Independence Day, where giant ships just show up over the major cities, that would cause a major panic. And so they'll do it slowly to kind of keep us calm. And they're not going to come along and share all the technology with us. We would weaponize it right now at our current level of consciousness. We're too barbaric still. So they're not going to clean up our problems either. They might help us with information, but they will restrict themselves to what a human being somewhere on the planet knows now or what was known in the past. So in other words, they could tell us everything that Tesla knew because Tesla was here. And so they're not going to clean up our problems for us. For instance, the Pleiadians have technology that within 1 month, they could clean up the entire Earth. Air, water, soil, GMOs, the plastic, everything. But they're not going to do it for the same reason you don't clean your kids' room for them. They're not going to learn. You got to learn to clean it up. So they're going to kind of guide us and give us some limited wisdom, just what we need, nothing that would cause problems here on Earth. They've done this before. They're very good at it. So they know what to do and what not to do. And they tend to err on the side of caution and the side of allowing us free will and allowing us to make mistakes. You got to be able to make mistakes. Making mistakes is part of learning. So that they're not going to come here and save us. They're going to come here and guide us just like a child who's, failing college and, smoking weed and really screwing up his life. And the father has to talk with him and says, this is where this is headed if you don't turn it around. Give him some gentle advice. It's going to be that kind of thing.
I believe Tesla was considered to be a Venusian. Is that right? Have you heard that?
I've heard he's Venusian. I've heard he's Pleiadian. He probably had lives on both those places. Yeah, but
that's how he had so much knowledge.
Yes. And if you watch documentaries on Tesla, you'll hear that he would make entire designs in his head and see how the thing worked before building it. So no trial and error. Wow. And of course, many of us bring our talents from our multidimensional selves. So from our earthly perspectives, we have our past lives, we have the current life we're in now, and then we have our future lives, which have yet to be lived. Well, there's no time on the other side of the veil in heaven. So from your soul's perspective, you're living all your lives simultaneously. And so people will draw on information and knowledge from other lifetimes. Peggy Fleming, Olympic ice skater back in the, I think, 70s or something like that. The first time she went ice skating, when she was 10, 11 years old, her neighbors invited her and they take her ice skating. And they got back and they said, well, how long has your daughter been taking lessons? And they said, well, she's never ice skated before in her life. She's doing spins and skating backwards. A 5-year-old who takes a couple of months of piano lessons and he's playing like Mozart. Well, he's drawing on his other lifetimes. And we all do that to some extent. And so Tesla certainly did that. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. I'm glad you brought up time. This subject fascinates me. I always have a question about this. And since you seem very knowledgeable, I'm wondering if you can answer this for me. My understanding of time, obviously, we only have the present moment, especially on the other side of the veil. Time doesn't exist, is what we always hear. And really, it's just a man-made construct for us here on Earth. So there's no past, there's no future, there's just the present moment. But how does that relate to free will then? Because I kind of look at it from the perspective of time is on a plane, and let's say it's a map, right? Let's use a map as an analogy. If you want to get from point A to point C in time, and you're in point A, and you have different routes you can take to get to point C. And so if you go down this street, that leads you to this reality. And if you go down this street, it leads you to that reality. So does that mean all of those realities all exist simultaneously? Because they have to be there for me to meet them if I choose that route. And if that's the case, that means there's an infinite number of me, and there's an infinite number of you, and there's an infinite number of Tracy. So my mind is just blown when I start thinking about that. And then, sorry, one last part of this question is, how does that relate to free will? Because if all of these options already exist on this plane, I mean, is the free will the fact that I'm making the choice, but then still the options exist. So I really didn't have free will because those options already exist. Does that make sense how I'm explaining that?
Yes, you have the free will because the options are all there. You walk up to a buffet, you can choose anything you want. And it doesn't matter if you choose the steak, the chicken's still there. It was an option. And so you can shift and take the chicken. So you can do that with your options down here on Earth. The now is the only moment that exists. The eternal now, they call it in heaven. And the past only exists when a human being remembers it, and the future only exists when you imagine it. So when you imagine something, you create the potential. And it'd be kind of like looking over at the chicken. And it doesn't mean you have to go over there and eat it. So timelines and all that is very difficult to understand from a human perspective, probably impossible. But there are splits and there are merges and there are some that go off on a dead end. Probably a good analogy is playing a video game. So there's this video game I used to play when I was a young man called Civilization 2. And you start off with a settler and you build cities and you can, dedicate resources to science or military or public relations and all that. And then you save the game along the way, right? So you save it, let's say at this time, and you say, well, I'm going to do this. And you go off in this direction. It didn't work out. So you quit that. And then you come back to the save game and you say, well, I'm going to go in this direction now. And you go off in that other direction. And so, and that's kind of how the timelines work. They can split, they can merge. There are different versions of Earth. So the multiverse theory of our scientists seems to be correct. There are all these potentials. Wow. And, you know, and when you change the now, what you're doing is you're shifting into a different reality. So using your example, if I need to go from A to C and I'm going to pass through B, there's no reason that I can't shift from the A reality to the C reality. But the way we do things down here on Earth, we do it in steps. It's part of our linear thinking, our linear existences. I don't understand it all, but I know there's all this potentials and timelines. And one near-death experiencer even saw like the machine of creation, creating all the potentials and the choices individuals make and how it works. And realities can be different. So my reality can be different than your reality. So you can be in a reality where that guy over there is wearing a red shirt, and in my reality, it's a green shirt. You know, I mean, that sounds crazy, but we're all creating our own realities by our thoughts and emotions, but they're all interacting, just much like an interactive video game the kids play these days. They put the, you know, the glasses on and they're all doing their own thing. And each one has a different perspective of that video game. Some people might be in two different places where there's nothing in common, and sometimes they're interacting. And that's kind of how it is here on Earth.
That's fascinating that you brought up the comment about the machine, because that was also one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, who is in charge of all of this? Like, who creates creation? I mean, the easy answer is God or the creator, but like, what exactly is that? Like, who is in charge? You know, who's creating these outcomes that potentially could exist for us?
Well, I'm looking at her. You are, and I am. And every little facet of creation is doing this. So we're just like a big team, you know, there doesn't have to be anybody in charge. So I used to work at to say there's nobody in charge. Yes, the creative benevolent source God is in charge, but we're all part of that. So I used to work at this orphanage. I did volunteer work at an orphanage, and there was like 7 different nonprofits involved, and I was one of them. And when we get together down there, there was no leader. There was no man in charge or woman in charge saying, do this, do that. This is what we're doing today. We'd kind of talk, oh, what do we need to do? Oh, we need to make some more bunk beds, or we need to fix that plumbing. And, well, who's got plumbing experience? Oh, that guy does. Okay. Well, who's got the experience with wood and can do the beds? Oh, you? Oh, okay. And everybody kind of decides, oh, this person is the best for that job, and they're going to make those decisions. I mean, it's just a big mix. So yeah, every little facet of creation is involved in this process, and we're doing it right now.
We're mentioning something about that made me think about Bashar just a moment ago. And one thing that he says, every moment is a new moment. So we are a new creation in every single moment. It's just like, it's so fast. It's you know, it's something that we can't comprehend. But as we move forward each moment in time, as it relates to the past, it actually changes who we were. So if we were this person in this moment, and then we're a different person in the next moment, that actually changes who we were in the prior moment in the past. So we're actually becoming a new person every single moment, and we're actually choosing to make that choice. And so if there's something consistent in your life that you don't like, it's because you're choosing to continue to have that in your life. And you actually can make the choice to change that if you change it in the next moment in time. And sometimes we can't make too drastic of changes because we'll have cognitive dissonance if we change things too dramatically. But if we make incremental changes, those are easier for us to manage and for our brain to understand those concepts, but that we do have that ability to make those changes at every moment in time. Have you heard the same concept? Because I know you follow Bashar as well.
Yeah, I actually got to see Bashar in person in LA a number of years back, and his description is a very good description. It's probably the best I've heard in terms of how all that works. Like when you quit smoking, it's not like I was a smoker and I quit. I shifted to a new reality in which I never smoked.
That's right.
And that's a hard one for our little monkey brains to wrap around. You know, it's a hard one for us to get.
It is.
But it's no different. When I was a 2-year-old child, there was a lot of things that made no sense to me. I didn't understand, and it takes a long time. And and decades of growing to be able to understand certain things. It's probably the same thing with us. We may never understand that completely from our human perspective, but that's probably the best analogy given is the one you just mentioned with Bashar.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a hard one to wrap your mind around, but it gives one a lot of hope. I think it's very motivational and inspirational to hear that that is very possible and that you can make large or small changes, whatever you choose, but you do have to just put the intention on making the change. So that's why I really love listening to him, because he actually gives you actionable things that you can do to change your life. And I think out of everybody I've listened to, he's probably one of the most prolific in terms of offering advice and being able to give you action steps to move you in the right direction or the direction that you want to go in.
Yeah, he's very good with this hands-on. This is what you do. There's some spiritual teachings that if you understand it, you know exactly what they're saying, but a lot of people don't. Look inside yourself and connect with your true self and go with the flow of that. It's like, well, what does that mean? I wake up in the morning, I got to go to work, prepare breakfast and do all these things. What do I do differently exactly to connect with my, So yeah, I like him because he gives specific steps that you could take to follow these spiritual rules and laws and for our own benefit and for our own growth. Very good teacher.
Definitely.
And for those of you interested, if you're going to listen to Bashar, I would start with one called, you can find it on YouTube, Bashar's Most Profound Speech Ever. And he gives the best description I've heard of who human beings are. It's only a couple minutes long. I quote it in my book, but he gives a great description of who we are and sort of our part in the fabric of creation. It's really well done. Well worth listening to.
I love that. I'm not sure if I've listened to that one yet, but I definitely will look it up. I love all of his teachings. It's so good.
My favorite channeler is Kryon, Kryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, but there's quite a few that I like. Yeah.
So David, what is the process of reincarnation? Do we get to decide where we're going to go next, or how does that work? What have you learned?
Well, my preference is not to call it reincarnation because that kind of brings up an older perspective of one lifetime after another with no connection in between. It's more like the idea of us here on Earth. So we're living a life. This is our life. And occasionally we will watch a really good movie or read a really good book to experience a different reality and maybe to learn something or to be entertained or both. And you get really into the movie or really into the book, and it's like you're in that reality. And souls are the same. Souls often enjoy or desire to leave the comfort of their heavenly homes to have a physical experiences for the purpose of making connections, for entertainment, for learning. So Earth is all of those things. It's supposed to be fun. It's a huge learning experience, and we're doing an important job for creation. So it's got multiple purposes. And the average human being, if you were to add up all their lifetimes, is probably over 1 million years old. And it's unlikely we started here on Earth. You don't start, going back to the example we used earlier, you don't start with a walk up Mount Everest when you're 2 years old and you just learn how to walk from one side of the room to the other. You got to take it step by step. So, it's all about for the purposes of learning and growth. Other planets that are easier, where they're already living in utopian societies and they're advanced. So new soul needs an advanced planet, just like a new driver needs a really good car. You can put an experienced driver in a car that's got bad brakes and, no rear view mirror and the steering sloppy. If they're experienced, they're not going to get in an accident. So, people get confused. They say, well, you're saying Earth is primitive, but we're advanced souls. Well, no, you need an advanced soul to sort of handle the primitive environment. So you start off on other planets where it's easier, and then you work your way up to Earth. But a spiritual person, the kind of person that likes to talk about the things you guys talk about, for instance, probably has maybe 3 to 5 million years under their belt.
Yeah. Wow. I'd never heard that before.
Many different lifetimes.
That's amazing.
On many different planets.
I don't know have you ever followed Dolores Cannon's work?
I have.
So I know she has commented in her books before that we kind of graduate in terms of our consciousness level and how we reincarnate. So you start as an element. Sometimes it's wind. Then you graduate to becoming a rock, for example, And then from there, I don't know if she includes animal in that projection process, but we just continue to go up the scale until we are a human. And I'm not sure what comes next. So my question would be, are we able to reincarnate as an alien, or did they ever reincarnate as us, as humans?
Absolutely. I mean, there's people listening to this channel who have been Pleiadian or Syrian or Arcturian, or, there's probably some that were Anunnaki, or everything you can imagine. Yeah, you have lots of different experiences. I heard one near-death experience where they had their life review, and then they were shown some of their other lives, and they were recounting an experience where they lived on this planet, and they were a plant, and they had these bulbous gas things that this plant grew, and that was their life, and it was sort of a very easy, calm, pleasant lifetime to experience that. So yeah, all sorts of different things. But I mean, once you're in a certain vibration or in a certain level, you don't switch around. So you don't go from incarnating to human, say, oh, I'm going back to a rock. The soul is not matched with that. So your vibration is matched with the kind of incarnation you do. But a rock has a consciousness, which is different than a plant's consciousness, which is different than an animal, which is different than a human being.
And I actually, just a real quick note on that too. I happened to hear, I think it might have been Dolores Cannon. I can't remember if it was her, but I'm pretty sure she had said that our pets, obviously animals, that part of what our job as caretakers for them is to grow their consciousness level so they can continue to graduate, because by giving them a name and giving them a personality and a place in our life as a family member in our family, then we are actually growing their I am consciousness. So they are building an awareness of things outside of themselves, and that is valuable to them for their growth in terms of their level of consciousness. Is that something you've heard before?
Yes. So yes, an animal consciousness will grow and learn just like a human consciousness does. Even a plant consciousness will grow and learn. If you look at nature, as above, so below, you'll see we're a reflection. Well, one of the aspects of consciousness is growth, and you can see it everywhere on Earth. Trees grow, animals grow, families grow, cities grow, businesses grow. I mean, there's just always growth and change. So of course that's reflected with an incarnation of an animal consciousness into the animal. They learn and grow.
I think I know the answer to this. Well, I mean, no one knows the answer to this, but I'm gathering from what I'm getting from you, there is a purpose to our life. There is a meaning of life. So I'm going to ask you, but I think I know the answer in terms of we are here to learn. We're here to become a better person, a better life form, a better being. That being said, am I off a little bit, or is there something you can add to that in terms of what is the meaning of life?
What is the meaning of life? Well, it's all about love. So love is the glue of the universe. It's the building blocks of creation. It's what God and all of us are made out of. So it's all about growing that love. And so, of course, everything we do down here, whether it's a negative or positive experience, there are no coincidences. There is no suffering in vain or things that happen that have no meaning. Everything is part of the growth of consciousness, the growth of love, the growth of creation. And so whether the experience is good or bad, when you get to your afterlife and you go through that life review, there's a lot of aha moments. And you could not have that teaching unless you went through the experience. So I'll give you an example down here. My whole life was very opposed to marriage. I didn't like the way I saw married people treating each other, at least in my home and the people that I grew up with. And I said, well, I'm never doing this. And I had to experience utter painful loneliness to be able to appreciate the beauty of a connection with another human being. So I wasn't ready for marriage. And of course, now that I have been married for quite some time, I'm seeing all the beautiful benefits of it. So consciousness is like that. Whether you have a good or bad experience, you're going to learn. If I drop you into a foreign country and you're going to stay at this hotel for a month, and there's an all-you-can-eat buffet that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The first day you walk up to that buffet and you don't recognize a single food, and now you've got to put a plate together that you're going to like. Well, you're going to be taking some things you don't like and trying those and going, oh my gosh, that was awful. And you're going to be trying some things that you do like. Doesn't matter whether you like or dislike the thing you chose. Tomorrow, because of those choices, you're going to choose better. And by the end of the 30 days, I'd be willing to bet you'd be choosing a pretty good meal every day. So yeah, good or bad doesn't matter. We learn. There's no coincidences. There's no suffering in vain. Everything has a purpose.
And I hear everyone talking these days about the Great Awakening, and we are supposedly currently in that process right now. What can you tell us about what you've learned from people that cross to the other side? Is that something that is a big moment in time for us here on Earth? And when are we awakened? when is that final moment of awareness going to take place? What is that process look like?
There's no single moment. When is the great adulthood? When does a child become an adult? It's not like a moment you can pick. It's a long, slow process. So it's the same here. But yes, we are in an acceleration, almost like going through puberty, sort of. And right now on Earth, there's a big change. And whenever there's big change that's happening fast, that brings along chaos and fear and all the things, you see. You turn on the 6 o'clock news and it looks like the world's falling apart, and nothing could be further from the truth. So let's talk about what's going on. There is a fear-love duality. And for many thousands and thousands of years, fear has been the dominant energy. And right around the late 1980s, early 1990s, love became dominant energy. So in that energy of fear, what we had was a paradigm. And that paradigm was this: you must fight to survive. You must take from others to survive. You must act in animal consciousness. The animal consciousness is growling and snarling, taking from others by force, no consideration for any other living thing other than yourself. You're only interested in surviving and thriving. So that was the consciousness for a long time. So what you would do is you would attach yourself to an extended family, or maybe a powerful city like the city of Troy, or maybe something as big as the Roman Empire, and then make yourself as strong as possible and then take from others. And the attitude was, well, if you don't do this, you're a fool. You want to be one of the ones victimized, or you want to be the ones thriving. It's one or the other. What's it going to be? Well, there's a change now. We were under the energy of love, which is dominant. It's supporting us. And any institution, any government, any financial institution, any social system, any group, anything that isn't based on love and integrity is going to start to have problems. And they're going to have to either change to be based on love and integrity, or they're going to fail. So what we're seeing is the failing of old systems. And the new reality is this: with our technology, the way we're talking now, with our amazing communication abilities, with our mass manufacturing, our computers, the internet, artificial intelligence, if used properly, with all these things, the new paradigm is this: there is enough for everyone. We do not have to fight each other to survive. And what we're seeing in the world today is a use of all this stuff, the technology and mass manufacturing and computers and communications, to accelerate the manipulation, the animal consciousness, And so it's being used for cutthroat competition. And we are just waking up to the powers of cooperation, which requires a higher consciousness. We're there now. And so we're going to start seeing cooperations far more powerful than competition. And, imagine things like Apple and Samsung, the two big phone manufacturers that have been fighting each other and suing each other. And I haven't tried it recently, but for a long time, you couldn't transfer files and pictures back and forth between the two because, they're not going to be compatible. They're not going to cooperate. What if Apple and Samsung said, you know what, we're still going to produce our own phones, and we're still going to develop our own technology and all that, but we will share everything with the other. In fact, if you want to interchange some employees, anything from our stuff you want to integrate into your phones, do it. Anything from your phone you want to integrate, do it. How much better would the phones be? How much cheaper would they be? How much more efficient would it be? So we're waking up to this now. And it's difficult because we don't see what's coming. So we're like the 5-year-old child, when his parents decide they're going to bulldoze the house because it served the family for a long time, but it's just getting old and the wood's rotten, the plumbing's leaking and the electrical's faulty and there's holes in the roof. I got to put buckets everywhere when it rains. And they say, well, we got to bulldoze it, make way for something bigger and better. It's going to serve us better. If they don't tell the kid what's going on, the kid's watching the bulldozers destroy the house. It seems like the end of the world. That's what we're seeing.
Mm.
So when you see this chaos, with the riots in the streets and 2021 and the politics being so divided and so dysfunctional and corporations getting like over the top greedy and just evil with the things they do. This is all part of like negativity coming to the surface, being dealt with, and changes happening, some out of necessity, some out of just recognizing the problem. So there's going to be this period of turmoil that we're going through. And it's important to just keep your calm, know that it's part of a change. When you pick up all your belongings and move from one house to another, that's chaotic. It's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, I like the term he uses. He says, get used to the acronym SUCK. Slow, uncomfortable change. So that's going to be difficult for a while. Doesn't mean you have to let it affect your life. If you say, and you have the intention, because we're great creators and we're great directors of our lives, there are no victims really from a heavenly perspective. If you say, it is my intention to have prosperity of health, prosperity of finances, it is my intention to have peace and a life filled with meaningful, loving relationships and a good job where I can use my talents and make a valuable contribution to humanity. And I'm not going to be part of the chaos. You're not going to be part of the chaos. It's a choice. Now, some people are going to be part of it because it helps accelerate and move things forward, but it's unpleasant to learn fast. It's unpleasant to run that mile instead of walk. So not a lot of people are going to choose it, but it's okay. Those who are acting out and going down and burning down buildings, believe it or not, that's helping us move to the right place. They're creating chaos, which is going to accelerate the change.
It's funny. That's exactly a conversation that Tracy and I had just, I think, yesterday, where we were talking about somebody that we know who is kind of a doomsdayer and very stressed out about all the negativity in the world. And what I said to Tracy is that's because that's that person's focus. That's their attention. They're on that. And there's things that have happened in my lifetime that are monumental things for other people in a negative way that it didn't even register. It wasn't even on my radar because I wasn't focused on it. So I think what you just said is perfect, that we do need to stay focused on the positive and manifest the reality that you actually want for yourself and not be fearful of what you don't want for yourself. Right. So that's what's going to help put you in that better state. And just one quick follow-up on what we were just talking about earlier about consciousness is if we are graduating our consciousness continually through all these lifetimes, what is the end result? Is there a specific moment in time that we merge back with the creator? And then what happens? What's the ultimate goal? What have you heard from the people you've talked with?
Yeah, you eventually merge back with creator, and now it's not physically bigger, but I don't have words to describe it. It's bigger. So it's just like, what if you had this strange machine where you could duplicate yourself into 10 people? Not copies. Taking that one and making 10 that are exactly the same as the original. And then you send those 10 out into the world. And one goes and lives in Japan for 10 years, and another lives in Russia, and another lives in France, another lives in Mexico, another lives in the US. And at the end of that, you'd all come back together and you'd merge into one person with all those experiences. You're a far more knowledgeable, worldly person. You've grown. And now this new person that's more knowledgeable and has more experience and more life, experiences to draw on, does it again. And so it's this coming together and then going out and exploring and changing and coming together again. It's a giant fractal. And it's this sort of oscillation, And so that's all part of the perfect plan of creation. A lot of near-death experiencers say, they come back and they say, well, I saw this perfect plan of creation. And some laugh. They go, how could I have forgotten this beautiful, elegantly simple, perfect plan? And the one thing that they all say is, when they're sent back, some of them are even told, you are not allowed to remember it. It would make things too easy, or it's not appropriate. It would hinder your growth. And so we can't grasp it from our earthly perspective. It's not available to us, but there's this perfect plan out there. And what we're doing now is all part of it.
David has a book called God Took My Clothes, which compiles all of the research David has done on the subject of near-death experiences and addresses such questions as what happens when we die. You can find his book on his website, and we will include those links in the description below. So David, in closing, what final words of wisdom can you leave us with?
If you turn on the 6 o'clock news, it seems like the entire world is falling apart. And the news is a well-crafted fear report. 8 billion people, the worst of the worst of the worst behavior. And they bring it right into our living rooms. And the human consciousness was not meant to take on the chaos and the drama and the suffering and the negativity of an entire planet. And those who do that, are involved in that, they suffer. One of the most disturbing things I ever heard from heaven is that most conspiracy theories are true or have an element of truth. Oh my gosh, things are messed up if that's the case. Well, a Pleiadian channeler said something that I thought would be a really good piece of advice for closing up here. And that is, if you're serious about your spirituality, if you're serious about your growth, if you're serious about having a happy life filled with joy, and joy, of course, is the biggest sign of spiritual maturity, you must disconnect yourself from that frequency of chaos and drama and fear and suffering and negativity. And that means shrinking your world. It means turning off the news. It's not important to know what's going on in the world. I didn't know what was going on between Russia and Ukraine until 2 months into the war, and I heard it secondhand. And just pay attention to your own little world. The people we come in contact with every day, the people we're interacting with. Doesn't help to know that this evil thing is happening over there. It doesn't help to change conspiracy, to try and be the whistleblower and get people to see these conspiracies that are going on. That doesn't help bring in the new world of love. The world's not going to be changed by electing the perfect set of leaders or passing a perfect set of laws to legislate utopia or pointing out all the bad guys and putting them behind bars. It changes by one act of love at a time. And when near-death experiencers are sometimes told, go back and change the world, they protest. I'm nobody. I can't do that. And they say, sure you can. It's real easy. You go out and you be the best version of yourself you can be. Be as kind and loving to others as you can be, especially when our ego tells us that they do not deserve our love and compassion. And when you do that, those people, their consciousness is raised, their vibration is raised, and they're a little better and nicer to the people around them. And it sort of ripples out, which is why we hear things from NDEs like, one person living in unconditional love is more powerful than millions living in fear. One person, you bring hope or joy to one soul, and millions receive the vibration. So it's all about love. Disconnect yourself from the craziness and just live your own good life. And by doing so, you'll be doing the best you can to help the growth of creation. It's all about love.
I love that. Just make the world around you in your little corner of the world a better place. Just be kind to others. So, David, we want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and bringing this information forward. We hope that people find comfort in hearing the information that you shared today. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It was such a pleasure being on the show.
Hi, David.